The crack of a bullwhip silenced the rowdy crowd gathered in Prosperity's dusty town square, where a pregnant woman stood trembling on the auction block, her auburn hair falling in tangles around her tear-streaked face. The year was 1873, and the frontier town of Prosperity, Colorado, had seen its share of desperate situations, but none quite like this. $200 for the woman and her unborn child. Do I hear $250? Bellowed Luther Rollins, the town's self-appointed auctioneer and owner of the local saloon. His voice carried across the square as curious onlookers and potential bidders assessed the merchandise. A young woman no more than 20 years of age, 5 months pregnant by the look of her swollen belly, her green eyes wide with terror. Zenobia Carver clutched her tattered shawl tightly around her shoulders, trying to maintain some semblance of dignity despite the humiliation of being sold like cattle. Her husband had gambled away their homestead and all their possessions before abandoning her to flee his mounting debts. The creditors had come for her instead, claiming she was the only thing of value left. $250 from Mr. Henderson, Rollins announced, pointing to the town's butcher, a man known for his cruel treatment of both animals and women. Do I hear $300? $300. Shouted another voice, this one belonging to Theodore Walsh, the elderly owner of the local brothel. Zenobia's knees nearly buckled. Either fate would leave her butchering animals or selling her body once her child was born. She closed her eyes, unable to look at the leering faces in the crowd. $500. The new bid silenced the crowd. All heads turned toward a tall figure standing at the back of the gathering. The afternoon sun cast his face in shadow beneath the wide brim of his Stetson, but his stance was unmistakable, confident, powerful, and somehow dangerous. Well, well, Rollins said, surprised by the high bid. $500 from Mr. Asher. Anyone willing to top that generous offer? The crowd murmured, but no one spoke up. Henderson spat in the dirt and Walsh shook his head, both knowing they couldn't match the price, going once, going twice. Rollins paused for dramatic effect. Sold to Isaac Asher for $500, the crowd parted as the man strode forward. Isaac Asher was not a regular in town, but his reputation preceded him. A successful rancher whose property lay several miles outside Prosperity, he was known to be fair but fiercely private. Stories circulated about his past. Some said he'd been a gunslinger, others claimed he'd lost a wife and child years ago. Whatever the truth, he kept to himself and rarely participated in town affairs. As he approached the auction block, he removed his hat, revealing rugged features weathered by sun and wind. His eyes, a striking shade of blue, locked with Zenobia's. To everyone's surprise, he extended his hand to help her down from the platform. "Madam," he said, his voice deep but gentle, "let's get you out of this sun." Too shocked to speak, Zenobia placed her trembling hand in his and allowed him to guide her down the steps. The crowd watched in stunned silence as Isaac settled his debt with Rollins, signed the necessary papers, and then led the pregnant woman toward his wagon. "Where are you taking me?" Zenobia finally found her voice once they were away from the prying eyes and ears of the townspeople. "My ranch," Isaac replied simply as he helped her onto the wagon seat. "You'll be safe there." "And what will you expect of me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper as she placed a protective hand over her swollen belly. Isaac paused, then looked directly into her eyes. "Nothing you're not willing to give, madam. I needed a housekeeper and you needed help. That's all there is to it." The relief that washed over Zenobia's face was immediate, though tinged with suspicion. In her experience, men rarely did anything without expecting something in return. "My name is Zenobia Carver," she offered, feeling she should at least introduce herself to the man who now legally owned her. "Isaac Asher," he replied with a slight nod. "Welcome to your new home, Mrs. Carver." As the wagon pulled away from Prosperity, Zenobia didn't look back. Whatever awaited her at Isaac Asher's ranch couldn't possibly be worse than what she was leaving behind. At least, that's what she desperately hoped. The journey to the Asher ranch took nearly 2 hours. They traveled in silence for most of it, the rhythmic clop of the horses' hooves and the creaking of the wagon wheels the only sounds between them. Zenobia stole occasional glances at her benefactor or her new owner. She wasn't entirely sure which to consider him. Isaac Asher was older than she initially thought, perhaps in his early 30s, with a strong jawline partially hidden beneath a neatly trimmed beard. His hands were calloused from years of hard work, but they handled the reins with a gentle confidence. There was no wedding ring on his finger, which both relieved and concerned her. A bachelor ranch owner taking in a pregnant woman would surely raise eyebrows. "It's not much farther," Isaac finally said, breaking the silence. "Just over that ridge." When they crested the hill, Zenobia couldn't suppress a small gasp. Below them sprawled a modest but well-maintained ranch. A two-story house painted white with green trim stood surrounded by several outbuildings, corrals filled with horses, and fields where cattle grazed. In the distance, mountains rose majestically against the sky, their peaks still capped with snow despite the summer heat. "It's beautiful," she admitted. Isaac's lips curved into a small smile, the first she'd seen from him. "Been working on it for 8 years now. Started with nothing but the land and a dream." As they approached the main house, a man emerged from one of the barns, tall and lanky with graying hair. "That's Elijah," Isaac explained. "My foreman, been with me since the beginning." There are 4 other hands who work the ranch, but they mostly stay in the bunkhouse closer to the north pasture. The wagon rolled to a stop in front of the house, and Isaac quickly hopped down before coming around to help Zenobia. She hesitated, suddenly terrified of the unknown that awaited her. "Mrs. Carver," Isaac said softly, seeming to sense her fear. "I meant what I said in town. You're safe here. I won't harm you or your child." Something in his eyes, a sincerity that couldn't be faked, gave her the courage to place her hand in his and allow him to help her down. Her legs were stiff from the journey, and she stumbled slightly. Isaac's strong hands steadied her, resting briefly at her waist before he quickly withdrew them. "Elijah," he called to the foreman, who approached with curiosity written on his weathered face. "This is Mrs. Carver. She'll be our new housekeeper." If Elijah found anything unusual about a heavily pregnant woman suddenly appearing at the ranch, he didn't show it. He simply tipped his hat and offered a kind smile. "Pleasure to meet you, madam. We sure could use a woman's touch around here." The boss can wrangle cattle better than most, but his cooking might kill a man. Isaac chuckled, the sound warm and genuine. "Elijah exaggerates, but not by much. Come inside, Mrs. Carver. I'll show you to your room." The interior of the house surprised Zenobia. While not lavish, it was far more comfortable than she'd expected a bachelor's residence to be. The furniture was solid and well crafted, the floors were clean, and curtains hung at the windows. But there were also signs that a woman's touch had indeed been missing: mismatched dishes stacked haphazardly on open shelves, books and papers scattered across tables, and a general sense of functional disorder. "You'll have this room," Isaac said, leading her to a spacious bedroom on the first floor. "I thought it would be easier for you given your condition. There's a washroom just through that door with a pump for water." Zenobia entered the room, momentarily speechless. A large bed with a quilted coverlet dominated the space. A rocking chair sat by the window, which overlooked a small garden. A wardrobe and chest of drawers stood against one wall, and a small writing desk against another. "This is too grand for a housekeeper," she said, turning to face him. Isaac shrugged. "It's just been sitting empty, might as well be put to good use." He seemed uncomfortable suddenly, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. "I'll let you get settled. There's a trunk of women's clothing in the attic that might fit. You belonged to my sister when she visited a few years back. I'll have Elijah bring it down." Before she could thank him, he was gone, closing the door softly behind him. Zenobia sank onto the edge of the bed, overwhelmed by the day's events. Her hand came to rest on her belly, feeling the reassuring movement of the child within. "We might be okay here," she whispered to her unborn baby, "but we can't get too comfortable. Men like Isaac Asher don't rescue pregnant women out of the goodness of their hearts. There will be a price eventually." But as she looked around the comfortable room, her room, at least for now, she allowed herself a moment of hope that perhaps, just this once, fortune had smiled upon her. The first few days at the Asher Ranch passed in a blur of adjustment and cautious optimism for Zenobia. True to his word, Isaac had kept a respectful distance, making no demands beyond asking her to prepare meals and maintain the house as she saw fit. She'd spent those initial days scrubbing, organizing, and bringing order to the bachelor household, finding purpose in the work that kept her hands busy and her mind occupied. By the end of her first week, the main house had been transformed. The kitchen gleamed with polished cookware and organized shelves. Fresh baked bread filled the air with its comforting aroma each morning. Wildflowers arranged in mason jars brightened tabletops, and the floors shone from vigorous sweeping and mopping. Isaac had said little about the changes, but had nodded approvingly when he entered for supper each evening, removing his hat and boots at the door without being asked a courtesy she hadn't expected from a man who'd lived alone for so long. It was during her second week at the ranch that Zenobia realized Isaac had been watching her, not in a predatory way that made her uncomfortable, but with a concerned eye that noted her increasing fatigue as the day progressed. "Mrs. Carver," he said one evening after supper as she cleared the dishes, "you're doing too much. Your condition, my condition, doesn't make me an invalid, Mr. Asher," she interrupted, her tone sharper than intended. The words hung between them, her momentary defiance surprising them both. Instead of anger, a slight smile touched Isaac's lips. "No, I don't suppose it does, but I didn't bring you here to work yourself to exhaustion either." Zenobia paused, a plate in her hand. "Why did you bring me here, Mr. Asher? You've never really said." Isaac's blue eyes met hers, then flickered away. He rose from the table and moved to the window, looking out at the twilight settling over the ranch. "I couldn't leave you there," he said simply. "Not with those men bidding on you like you were livestock." "But $500 is just money," he finished for her. "I have enough." Zenobia set the plate down, studying his profile in the fading light. Most men would expect something in return for such generosity. Isaac turned to face her fully. "I'm not most men, Mrs. Carver. And contrary to what those papers say, I don't consider that I've bought you. Consider it more of a temporary arrangement until you decide what you want to do after your child is born." The mention of her child brought Zenobia's hand instinctively to her belly, where a noticeable kick greeted her touch. A small gasp escaped her lips. "Is something wrong?" Isaac asked, concern evident in his voice. "No," she reassured him, smiling despite herself. "The baby is just particularly active tonight." A look of wonder crossed Isaac's usually stoic face. "May I?" He began, then stopped himself. "Forgive me, that's far too personal." "You may," Zenobia found herself saying, surprising them both once again. She took a step toward him and gently took his hand, guiding it to the spot where her child continued its acrobatics. Isaac's large hand rested tentatively on the curve of her belly, warm even through the fabric of her dress. When the baby kicked against his palm, his eyes widened in amazement, and something in Zenobia's chest tightened at the expression of pure wonder on his face. "That's remarkable," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. For a moment they stood connected by this shared marvel until self-consciousness descended upon them both simultaneously. Isaac withdrew his hand as if burned, and Zenobia stepped back, her cheeks flushed. "Forgive me," he said again, clearing his throat. "I didn't mean to overstep." "You didn't," she assured him quickly. "It's nice sometimes to share this. My husband never," she stopped abruptly, the mention of her former spouse bringing unwelcome memories. Isaac's expression darkened. "Your husband, the townspeople mentioned he abandoned you, left you to pay his debts." Zenobia turned away, busying herself with the dishes again. "Yes, Clayton was never one to face consequences. When the gambling debts mounted and the creditors came calling, he simply disappeared in the night, left me to face them alone." "And the child?" Isaac asked, his voice carefully neutral. "Is his," Zenobia confirmed, anticipating his next question. "Though I doubt he even knows about the baby. I discovered my condition after he'd been gone nearly a month." Isaac was quiet for a long moment. "If you don't mind my asking, how did you end up on that auction block?" Zenobia sighed, setting down the dishcloth. After Clayton left, I tried to make ends meet, but the creditors seized our homestead. I took work cleaning at the hotel, but when my pregnancy began to show, the owner's wife dismissed me, claiming I set a bad example. With nowhere to live and no money, I slept in the church for a while until Reverend Phillips discovered me. He meant well, I think, but his solution was to arrange my sale to someone who could provide for me and the child. "That's not legal," Isaac said, his jaw tightening. "You can't sell a person." "Perhaps not officially," Zenobia agreed, "but out here, far from courts and proper law, who would stop them? Besides, the papers were drawn up as an indentured servant contract, perfectly legal if morally questionable." Isaac ran a hand through his hair, disturbing the neat waves. "I should burn those papers." "But you won't," Zenobia said with surprising certainty. "Because right now they protect me as much as they bind me. While I'm legally in your employ, no one can take me away." Including Clayton, should he return. The insight seemed to surprise Isaac. He studied her with newfound respect. "You're a clever woman, Mrs. Carver." "I'm a survivor, Mr. Asher," she corrected gently. "And right now, surviving means being practical rather than proud." Their conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. Elijah stood there, hat in hand. "Sorry to disturb you, boss, but we've got trouble with the north fence line. Looks like someone's been cutting the wire." Isaac's expression hardened. "I'll be right there." He turned back to Zenobia. "We'll continue this conversation another time, Mrs. Carver, and please rest when you need to. The house won't fall apart if the dusting waits until tomorrow." After he left, Zenobia finished cleaning the kitchen, her mind replaying their interaction. The gentle press of his hand against her belly, the wonder in his eyes when her baby kicked, the respect with which he treated her opinions and concerns. For the first time since arriving at the Asher Ranch, she allowed herself to acknowledge a dangerous truth. She was beginning to care what Isaac Asher thought of her. And that realization frightened her more than any auction block ever could. As August gave way to September, the days grew shorter, and the cottonwood trees along the creek turned golden. Zenobia found herself settling into life at the Asher Ranch with surprising ease. Her pregnancy advanced, her belly growing rounder each day, but instead of feeling vulnerable, she felt increasingly secure in her temporary home. Isaac had kept his word about allowing her to rest more, even going so far as to hire a young woman from town, Abigail Porter, to come twice a week to help with the heavier cleaning. At first, Zenobia had protested the expense, but Isaac had been firm. "The doctor in town says women in your condition shouldn't be lifting heavy things or standing too long," he'd told her when she questioned the necessity. "You spoke to the doctor about me?" Zenobia had asked, surprised. Isaac had shifted uncomfortably. "I wanted to make sure we were doing right by you and the child. Dr. Marshall gave me some advice." The thought of Isaac consulting a physician on her behalf had touched her deeply, though she'd tried not to show it. Instead, she'd simply thanked him and accepted Abigail's help, recognizing that her pride wasn't worth risking her baby's health. As her 7th month of pregnancy began, Zenobia noticed other small ways Isaac had been preparing for the baby's arrival. A beautifully crafted wooden cradle appeared in her room one morning, Isaac's own handiwork, she later learned from Elijah. A package delivered from Denver contained soft flannel for baby clothes and tiny knitted booties. When questioned, Isaac merely shrugged and said, "Babies need things." It was during an unexpectedly cool evening in mid-September that their relationship shifted subtly. The ranch hands had gone into town for supplies, and Elijah was visiting his sister in the next county. Isaac and Zenobia found themselves alone at the ranch for the first time since her arrival. She'd prepared a simple supper of beef stew and fresh bread, and they ate in companionable silence until Isaac surprised her by asking, "Have you thought about names?" "For the baby." Zenobia looked up from her bowl, startled by the personal question. "I have, actually. Oliver if it's a boy, after my father, and Rose for a girl after my grandmother." Isaac nodded approvingly. "Good, strong names. Did you and your wife ever discuss children's names?" The question slipped out before Zenobia could stop herself. Isaac had never mentioned a wife, but she'd noticed the way he sometimes gazed at the wedding ring he wore on a chain around his neck when he thought no one was watching. A shadow crossed Isaac's face, and Zenobia immediately regretted her curiosity. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "That was presumptuous of me." "No," Isaac said after a moment. "It's a fair question given the circumstances." He took a deep breath before continuing. "Sarah and I were married for 3 years. We talked about children, dreamed about them. She liked the name Elizabeth for a girl after her mother. I favored James for a boy." "What happened to her?" Zenobia asked softly. Isaac's fingers unconsciously found the ring hanging beneath his shirt. "Influenza. 6 years ago. She was pregnant when she fell ill. We lost them both." "I'm so sorry," Zenobia whispered, her heart aching for him. "It was a long time ago," Isaac said, though the pain in his eyes suggested otherwise. "After I threw myself into building this ranch, it was all I had left of our dream." "It's a beautiful dream," Zenobia offered. "She would be proud of what you've accomplished." A small smile touched Isaac's lips. She would have loved seeing the house full of life again. It was too quiet for too long. Their eyes met across the table, an understanding passing between them that transcended words. In that moment, Zenobia saw Isaac not as her benefactor or employer, but as a man who had suffered profound loss and loneliness just as she had in her own way. The baby chose that moment to deliver a particularly strong kick, causing Zenobia to place her hand on her belly with a small gasp. "Are you all right?" Isaac asked, immediately concerned. "Yes," she assured him with a smile, "just a very active evening for this little one." Isaac hesitated, then said, "May I feel it again, the baby?" Instead of answering, Zenobia rose from her chair and moved around the table to stand beside him. She took his hand and placed it on the side of her belly where the movement was strongest. The baby obligingly kicked against his palm. "That's amazing," Isaac murmured, his face close to hers as they both looked down at his hand resting on her rounded belly. "A miracle." "Yes," Zenobia agreed, suddenly very aware of how near he was, of the warmth of his hand through her dress, of the clean scent of soap and leather that clung to him. Isaac seemed to realize their proximity at the same moment. He slowly raised his eyes to meet hers, and Zenobia felt her breath catch at the intensity she found there. For a heartbeat, she thought he might lean forward, closing the small distance between them. Instead, he gently withdrew his hand and stepped back. "Thank you," he said, his voice rougher than usual, "for sharing that." The moment passed, but something had changed between them, an acknowledgement of feelings neither was ready to name but could no longer entirely deny. Later that night, as Zenobia prepared for bed, she found herself standing before the small mirror in her room, studying her reflection. Her body had changed so much in the past months, her once slender frame now softly rounded with pregnancy, her face fuller, her hair thicker and more lustrous. But it was the expression in her eyes that gave her pause a hopeful light that hadn't been there when she'd arrived at the ranch. "This is dangerous," she whispered to herself. "He purchased you at auction. You're carrying another man's child. He still wears his dead wife's ring." Yet despite all the logical reasons to guard her heart, Zenobia couldn't deny the warmth that spread through her chest whenever Isaac entered a room, or the way his rare smiles made her day brighter. Somehow, against all odds and common sense, she was falling in love with the quiet, honorable rancher who had rescued her. "It can never happen," she told her reflection firmly. "Once the baby comes, I'll need to make my own way. I can't expect him to support another man's child indefinitely." But as she climbed into bed and blew out the lamp, Zenobia couldn't help wondering if the emotion she'd glimpsed in Isaac's eyes might possibly mirror her own growing feelings, and what that could mean for their future. October arrived with brilliant colors painting the landscape and a noticeable chill in the morning air. Zenobia's pregnancy had reached its 8th month, and she found herself moving more slowly, her back aching from the weight of her child. Isaac had insisted she rest more, often bringing her tea in the afternoons and encouraging her to sit in the rocking chair on the porch when the weather permitted. Their relationship had settled into a comfortable routine, tinged with an unspoken tension, lingering glances. accidental touches that sent warmth spreading through Zenobia's body, conversations that stretched long into the evening. Yet neither seemed willing to acknowledge the growing attraction between them, as if naming it might somehow destroy the delicate balance they had achieved. It was during one such peaceful afternoon, as Zenobia sat on the porch, mending one of Isaac's shirts, that she spotted a cloud of dust approaching from the direction of town. Shading her eyes against the sun, she made out a single rider approaching at a gallop. Something about the urgency of the rider's pace sent a chill of foreboding through her. "Isaac," she called, setting aside her mending and rising awkwardly to her feet. "Someone's coming." Isaac emerged from the barn where he'd been repairing tack. Following her gaze to the approaching rider, he frowned and moved to stand protectively near her. As the horse drew closer, Zenobia recognized the rider as Thomas Jenkins, the young man who worked at the general store in Prosperity. He reined in his lathered horse sharply at the foot of the porch steps. "Mr. Asher," he called, breathless from his hard ride. "Sheriff asked me to fetch you. There's trouble in town." "What kind of trouble?" Isaac asked, his hand unconsciously moving to the revolver at his hip. "Clayton Carver's back," Thomas announced, his eyes darting to Zenobia. "Been making a scene at the saloon, demanding to know where his wife is. Says someone stole her from him." Zenobia felt the blood drain from her face. Her knees weakened, and she might have fallen if Isaac hadn't quickly moved to steady her with a strong arm around her waist. "Did you tell him she was here?" Isaac asked sharply. Thomas shook his head. "No, sir, but Luther Rollins did. Clayton's threatening to come out here with guns blazing if you don't bring Mrs. Carver back to town immediately." He hesitated, then added reluctantly, "He's got 3 rough-looking fellows with him. They're all armed." Isaac's jaw tightened. "Tell Sheriff Morgan I'll be there shortly, alone." "Isaac, no." Zenobia clutched his arm, panic rising in her throat. "You don't know Clayton. He's violent when he drinks, and he'll be furious that you purchased what he considers his property." "You're not property," Isaac said firmly, his blue eyes fierce with determination. "And I won't let him near you or your child. Please," Zenobia begged, tears welling in her eyes. "He'll kill you. He's threatened men before who have crossed him." Isaac gently disengaged her hand from his arm and turned to Thomas. "Ride back and tell the sheriff I'm coming. Also tell him that Mrs. Carver is under my protection according to a legal contract, and her husband abandoned her months ago, forfeiting any claim." Thomas nodded and wheeled his horse around, galloping back toward town. "You're staying here," Isaac told Zenobia, his tone brooking no argument. "Elijah and 2 of the hands will remain with you. Keep the doors locked and don't open them for anyone but me." "I should go with you," Zenobia insisted. "Maybe I can talk to him, make him understand." "No," Isaac cut her off, his expression softening as he looked at her. "Your place is here, keeping yourself and your baby safe. I won't risk either of you." Before she could protest further, he placed his hands on her shoulders, his eyes holding hers intently. "Zenobia," he said, using her given name for the first time since she'd arrived at the ranch. "I promise you, Clayton Carver will never hurt you again. Trust me." The use of her name and the fierce protectiveness in his voice momentarily silenced her objections. She nodded mutely, her heart pounding with fear not for herself, but for this man who was willingly riding into danger on her behalf. Isaac called for Elijah, quickly explaining the situation and giving instructions for Zenobia's protection. Within 20 minutes, he had saddled his fastest horse and was preparing to leave. As he mounted, Zenobia approached him one last time. "Isaac," she said, looking up at him with desperate concern, "please be careful. I couldn't bear it if something happened to you because of me." Isaac looked down at her, something unreadable in his expression. Then, in a move that surprised them both, he leaned down from the saddle and pressed his lips to her forehead in a gentle kiss. "I'll be back before dark," he promised softly. "Keep the door locked." With that, he straightened, touched his heels to his horse's flanks, and galloped down the road toward town, leaving Zenobia staring after him with her heart in her throat and her fingers pressed to the spot his lips had touched. The hours of Isaac's absence stretched interminably for Zenobia. She paced the house, despite Elijah's gentle suggestions that she sit and rest. Her mind conjured terrible scenarios: Clayton shooting Isaac in the street, Clayton bringing his friends to overpower the ranch's defenses, Clayton reclaiming her and taking her away to punish her for what he would see as betrayal. "Mrs. Carver," Elijah finally said as the afternoon waned, "the boss knows how to handle himself. He wasn't always a rancher, you know." Zenobia paused in her pacing. "What do you mean?" Elijah hesitated, as if uncertain whether he should continue. "Well, before he settled here, Mr. Asher rode with the law, was a deputy marshal for nearly 4 years, tracked down some of the worst outlaws in the territory." "He never mentioned that," Zenobia said, surprised. "He doesn't like to talk about those days," Elijah explained. "But he knows how to use that gun he wears, and he knows how to handle men like your husband, so you just try not to worry too much." The information provided little comfort. Even former lawmen could be shot, especially when outnumbered 4-1. As dusk approached with still no sign of Isaac's return, Zenobia's anxiety reached a fever pitch. The baby sensed her distress, moving restlessly within her womb. She placed a hand on her belly, trying to calm both herself and her child. "It's all right," she whispered. "He'll come back to us." The words slipped out unbidden, and Zenobia caught herself. Us. When had she begun thinking of herself and Isaac as connected in that way? The realization both frightened and comforted her. Just as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the ranch yard, the sound of approaching hoofbeats brought Zenobia rushing to the window. Relief flooded through her as she recognized Isaac's tall figure astride his horse. He was riding slowly, but he was alone and appeared unharmed. Ignoring Elijah's warnings to wait, Zenobia rushed outside to meet him as he dismounted. In the fading light, she could see that his knuckles were bruised and there was a small cut above his right eyebrow, but otherwise he seemed uninjured. "You're hurt," she said, reaching up to touch the cut gingerly. Isaac caught her hand, holding it against his cheek for a moment before lowering it. "It's nothing, just a scratch, Clayton," she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Gone," Isaac said simply. "He won't be bothering you again." Fear clutched at Zenobia's heart. "You didn't kill him." "No," Isaac's lips quirked in a grim smile. "Though not for lack of wanting to when I heard how he spoke about you. We had words, followed by an exchange of fists. Then Sheriff Morgan intervened and informed your husband that the legal papers for your indenture contract superseded any marriage rights he might claim, especially since he had abandoned you without support." "And he accepted that?" Zenobia asked incredulously, knowing Clayton's stubborn nature. "Not willingly," Isaac admitted. "But when the sheriff threatened to arrest him for outstanding debts in the county, and I offered to pay him a sum to relinquish any claim on you and the child, he suddenly found it in his heart to let you go." "You paid him?" Zenobia was stunned. "After everything he did," Isaac shrugged. "It seemed the quickest way to resolve the matter. He and his friends boarded the afternoon stage to Denver. According to the sheriff, he was already talking about heading to California. I don't think he'll be back." Zenobia's legs suddenly felt too weak to support her. The relief of knowing Clayton was gone, combined with the emotional exhaustion of the day, overwhelmed her. Isaac must have sensed her unsteadiness because he quickly swept her into his arms, cradling her against his chest. "You shouldn't be carrying me," she protested weakly. "I'm far too heavy in my condition." "You're no burden," Isaac said, his voice low and intimate as he carried her into the house. "And you've had a difficult day." He set her down gently on the sofa in the sitting room, but remained kneeling beside her, his eyes searching her face with concern. "Are you all right? Do you need the doctor?" "I'm fine," Zenobia assured him, though tears had begun streaming down her face. "Just overwhelmed." "I was so afraid for you." Isaac reached up to brush away her tears with his thumb, his touch tender. "I promised I'd come back to you." "Yes, you did," she whispered, unable to look away from the intensity in his blue eyes. For a long moment, they remained frozen in that position, something powerful and unspoken passing between them. Then Isaac slowly leaned forward, giving her every opportunity to pull away if she wished. When she didn't, he pressed his lips to hers in a kiss so gentle it nearly broke her heart. The kiss was brief, a question more than a demand, and when he pulled back, uncertainty shadowed his features. "Forgive me," he began. "I shouldn't have." Zenobia silenced him by placing her fingers against his lips. "Don't apologize," she said softly. "Not for that, not ever for that." Relief washed over Isaac's face, followed by something deeper and more profound. He took her hand from his lips and pressed a kiss to her palm. "I've wanted to do that for weeks," he confessed, "but I was afraid you'd think I was taking advantage of your situation." "And I've wanted you to," Zenobia admitted, her cheeks flushing. "But I was afraid you were still in love with your wife's memory." Isaac's expression grew thoughtful. "I will always love Sarah," he said honestly. "She was my first love, and a part of my heart will always belong to her. But I've learned that the heart can expand. It can make room for new love without diminishing what came before." "New love," Zenobia repeated, hardly daring to hope he meant what she thought he did. "Yes," Isaac said, his voice strengthening with certainty. "I love you, Zenobia Carver. I think I began falling in love with you that first day on the auction block, when you stood there with your head held high despite your circumstances. And every day since, my feelings have only grown deeper." Tears filled Zenobia's eyes again, but this time they were tears of joy. "I love you too," she whispered, "though I've been telling myself it was impossible, that you could never want a woman carrying another man's child." Isaac placed his hand on her rounded belly with reverence. "This child is innocent of its father's sins," he said firmly. "And I already love it because it's a part of you. If you'll let me, I want to be a father to this baby. I want to build a life with you both." "You mean that?" Zenobia asked, hardly able to believe what she was hearing. "With all my heart," Isaac assured her, taking her hands in his. "Marry me, Zenobia, not because of a contract or obligation, but because we choose each other. Let me love you and your child as my own family." Joy unlike anything Zenobia had ever known burst within her chest. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, I'll marry you." Isaac's face lit with happiness, and he leaned forward to kiss her again, this time with all the passion and promise of their newfound love. When they finally parted, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "I should burn those indenture papers now," he murmured. Zenobia smiled, running her fingers through his hair. "Not yet," she teased. "I still have a month of cooking and cleaning left on my contract. I wouldn't want to shortchange you." Isaac laughed, the sound joyous and carefree in a way she'd never heard from him before. "In that case, Mrs. Soon-to-be Asher, I believe your next duty is to allow your employer to prepare supper while you rest." "That sounds like a very reasonable arrangement," Zenobia agreed, her heart so full she thought it might burst. As Isaac helped her to her feet and led her to the kitchen, his arm protectively around her waist, she marveled at how drastically her life had changed in just a few short months, from despair on an auction block to the promise of love and family with a man who saw her true worth. The weeks leading up to the baby's arrival passed in a haze of happiness for Zenobia. Isaac insisted they marry before the birth, not wanting her child to enter the world without his name to protect it. The ceremony was small but meaningful, held in the ranch house living room with Reverend Phillips officiating, Elijah serving as best man, and Abigail Porter as matron of honor. Zenobia wore a simple blue dress that Isaac had ordered from Denver, altered to accommodate her advanced pregnancy. When she appeared at the top of the stairs, Isaac's face had shown such adoration that she momentarily forgot how ungainly she felt. "You are the most beautiful bride I've ever seen," he'd whispered as she joined him before the reverend. The wedding night had been chaste by necessity, given Zenobia's condition, but Isaac had held her all night long, his hand resting protectively over their baby, as he now called it. The tenderness with which he treated her only deepened her love for him. As November settled over the ranch with its shorter days and occasional light snowfalls, Zenobia's time drew near. Dr. Marshall visited weekly, assuring them that everything was progressing normally. Isaac had converted a corner of their bedroom into a nursery, the cradle he'd built positioned where Zenobia could easily reach it from the bed. It was during a cold, clear night in mid-November that Zenobia awoke to the unmistakable sensation of her waters breaking. She gently shook Isaac awake. "It's time," she whispered, trying to keep the fear from her voice despite the pain already beginning to grip her lower back. Isaac was instantly alert, his calm efficiency belying the anxiety in his eyes. He helped her into a clean nightgown, then sent one of the ranch hands to fetch Doctor Marshall, while Elijah rode to bring Abigail, who had experience assisting with births. The labor progressed steadily through the night. Isaac never left Zenobia's side, holding her hand through contractions, wiping her brow with cool cloths and murmuring encouragement. Doctor Marshall arrived just before dawn, and by mid-morning, Zenobia's cries of pain gave way to the lusty wails of a newborn. "It's a boy," Dr. Marshall announced, placing the squirming, red-faced infant on Zenobia's chest. "A fine, healthy son." Tears streamed down Zenobia's face as she gazed at her child. "Oliver," she whispered, looking up at Isaac. "Oliver Asher." Isaac's eyes were wet as he tenderly touched the baby's dark hair. "Hello, son," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Welcome to the world as Doctor." Marshall and Abigail cleaned up and quietly left the new family alone. Isaac settled carefully on the bed beside Zenobia, his arm around her shoulders as they both marveled at the miracle they held. "He's perfect," Isaac said, gently stroking the baby's tiny hand with his finger. When Oliver reflexively grasped it, Isaac's face lit with wonder. "Strong grip, he'll be a fine horseman someday. You truly don't mind?" Zenobia asked softly. "That he's not of your blood," Isaac looked at her with such love it nearly took her breath away. "Zenobia, this child became mine the moment I fell in love with his mother. Blood doesn't make a family, love does, and I already love him with all my heart." As if understanding his words, little Oliver opened his eyes for the first time, revealing irises of the deepest blue, so similar to Isaac's that Zenobia gasped. "Look at that," Isaac chuckled. "He's already trying to convince everyone he's my son." "Maybe it's a sign," Zenobia suggested, smiling tiredly, "that you were meant to be his father all along." Isaac pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead, then to Oliver's. "I believe you're right, my love. Some things are simply meant to be." As winter settled over the Asher Ranch, bringing with it short days and long, cozy evenings, the small family found their rhythm. Isaac proved to be a natural father, often walking the floor with Oliver when he was fussy at night so Zenobia could rest. The baby thrived under their care, growing stronger and more alert with each passing day. Christmas arrived with a light dusting of snow and a feeling of profound gratitude. Isaac surprised Zenobia with a delicate gold locket containing a tiny portrait of Oliver that he'd commissioned from a traveling photographer who'd passed through prosperity. For Isaac, Zenobia had embroidered handkerchiefs with his initials and knitted a warm scarf to protect him during his work around the ranch. But their greatest gift was the one they gave each other, a family reborn from circumstances that had once seemed hopeless. As they sat before the fire that Christmas night, Oliver sleeping peacefully in his father's arms, Zenobia reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her to this moment of perfect contentment. "What are you thinking about?" Isaac asked, noticing her thoughtful expression. "I was just remembering that day on the auction block," she said softly. "How terrified I was, how certain that my life was over." Isaac's expression grew solemn. "When I saw you standing there, something inside me couldn't bear to see you treated that way. I hadn't planned to bring anyone home with me, but when I looked into your eyes..." He paused, searching for the right words. "It was like looking at a reflection of my own loneliness, and somehow I knew that rescuing you might save us both." Zenobia moved closer to him on the sofa, resting her head against his shoulder as she gazed at their sleeping son. "You did save me," she whispered. "In every way a person can be saved." "No," Isaac corrected gently, pressing a kiss to her hair. "We saved each other. And now we have everything I ever dreamed of, but thought I'd never find again: love, family, purpose." As the fire crackled and snow fell silently outside the windows of their warm home, Zenobia silently thanked whatever twist of fate had placed her on that auction block, and moved Isaac Asher to raise his hat and say those life-changing words. "I'll have her." For in gaining her freedom through his momentary act of possession, she had found something far more precious than independence. She had found a love strong enough to heal two wounded hearts and create a family bound not by blood or obligation, but by choice and devotion that would last a lifetime. The years passed swiftly at the Asher Ranch, marked by the changing seasons and the milestones of family life. Oliver grew from a curious toddler into a spirited young boy with his mother's auburn hair and his father's steady temperament. Isaac taught him to ride almost before he could walk, and by the age of 5, he was helping with small chores around the ranch, proudly following in his father's footsteps. When Oliver was 3, the family welcomed a daughter, Elizabeth Sarah Asher, named for both Isaac's first wife and his mother. Little Beth, as they called her, had Zenobia's green eyes and a determined personality that kept everyone on their toes. Oliver took his role as big brother seriously, alternating between exasperation at her tendency to follow him everywhere and fierce protectiveness when any threat, real or imagined, came near her. By the spring of 1880, the Asher Ranch had prospered beyond Isaac's early dreams. The main house had been expanded to accommodate their growing family, with a dedicated schoolroom where Zenobia taught the children their letters and numbers. The cattle operation had doubled in size, and Isaac's reputation for fair dealing and quality stock had spread throughout the territory. But the greatest wealth, as both Isaac and Zenobia frequently reminded each other, was the love that filled their home. The wounds of their past lives had healed, leaving only occasional scars that served as reminders of how far they had come. On a warm afternoon in May, as Zenobia hung laundry on the line with 7-year-old Oliver helping by tangling more sheets than he smoothed, she caught sight of Isaac returning from the north pasture. He rode tall in the saddle, his dark hair now threaded with silver at the temples, his face more weathered but still handsome enough to make her heart skip a beat even after all these years. Beside him rode 4-year-old Beth, perched securely in front of him on the saddle, her little hands gripping the pommel as she chattered away about something that had her father smiling broadly. "Mama, look," Oliver called, pointing to the approaching riders. "Pa's letting Beth ride Thunderbolt." "I see that," Zenobia replied, shading her eyes against the sun. Thunderbolt was Isaac's personal mount, a magnificent black stallion with a gentle disposition despite his imposing name. As they drew closer, Beth caught sight of her mother and brother and began waving excitedly. "Mama, Oliver." "Pa let me steer, all by myself." Isaac reined in the horse near the clothesline, his blue eyes twinkling with amusement. "She's a natural, just like her brother," he announced proudly. "Didn't even flinch when a jackrabbit startled old Thunder here." "Is that so?" Zenobia asked, reaching up to lift her daughter from the saddle. "Well, I think such bravery deserves a special treat. I believe there might be some fresh cookies cooling in the kitchen." "Cookies," both children chorused, Oliver immediately abandoning his half-hearted laundry duties. "After you help your mother finish hanging these sheets," Isaac added firmly, dismounting in one fluid motion despite the knee injury that sometimes troubled him in damp weather, a souvenir from his martial days. The children groaned but complied, knowing their father's word was final. With their help, the task was completed quickly, and they raced toward the house, already arguing about who would get the biggest cookie. Isaac caught Zenobia around the waist as she moved to follow them, pulling her close for a lingering kiss. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Asher," he murmured against her lips. "Have I told you today how beautiful you are? Only twice at breakfast," she teased, running her fingers through his hair. "I was beginning to think you'd forgotten." "Never," he promised, kissing her again. When they finally parted, he kept his arms around her, his expression growing more serious. "I had a letter from the land office in Denver today. Old man Henderson's property adjacent to our east pasture is going up for sale. His children want to sell now that he's passed." "Are you thinking of buying it?" Zenobia asked, knowing how Isaac had always talked about expanding in that direction. He nodded. The price is fair and it would give us access to that spring-fed creek year-round, but it's a significant investment. I wanted to discuss it with you before making any decisions. Zenobia felt a rush of appreciation for her husband. Despite having the financial means to make such decisions independently, Isaac had always treated her as a full partner in the ranch operations. He valued her opinion and included her in every major choice affecting their future. "I think it's a wonderful opportunity," she said after considering for a moment. "The children are growing so fast. Someday Oliver will need land of his own, and who knows, perhaps Beth will want her own piece of the ranch as well." Isaac smiled, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "My practical wife, always thinking ahead. One of us has to," she countered with a laugh. "Otherwise, you'd have given both children their own ponies by now, ranch expansion or not." "Speaking of giving the children things," Isaac said, a mysterious glint in his eye. "I have a surprise for all of you. There's to be a county fair in Prosperity next month, the first one they've organized. Horse races, livestock competitions, baking contests, the works. I thought we might all attend, make a proper holiday of it." Zenobia's eyes widened with delight. "The children would love that, and I could enter my apple preserves in the competition. And I was thinking Oliver might want to enter his pony in the children's riding exhibition," Isaac added. "He's been practicing those figure-eights for weeks now." "He'll be over the moon," Zenobia said, imagining her son's excitement. "And Beth." "There's a doll-making contest for little girls," Isaac revealed. "Elijah's wife mentioned it when she was here last week. Thought Beth might enjoy it with your help." Zenobia felt a rush of tenderness for this thoughtful man who remembered even the smallest details about their children's interests. "You're a wonderful father, Isaac Asher," she said softly. "Our children are so blessed to have you." A shadow crossed Isaac's face, brief but unmistakable. "Sometimes I still wonder if Oliver ever thinks about his real father," he admitted quietly, "if he ever feels cheated somehow." "Isaac," Zenobia said firmly, placing her hand against his cheek, "you are Oliver's real father in every way that matters. Clayton may have given him life, but you've given him love, guidance, and your name. Oliver doesn't remember any father but you." Isaac covered her hand with his own. "I know, it's foolish to worry after all this time. It's just that you love him so much you want to be sure he has everything he needs," Zenobia finished for him. "That's not foolish, that's being a parent." The tension eased from Isaac's shoulders. "How did I get so lucky?" he asked, gathering her close again. "I believe it had something to do with an auction and a very gallant bid," Zenobia reminded him, her eyes sparkling with humor and love. Isaac laughed, the rich sound carrying across the ranch yard. "Best $500 I ever spent," he declared. "500 and one of your good hats," Zenobia corrected, remembering how he'd offered his hat to shelter her from the sun that first day. "You never did get that one back." "A small price to pay for a lifetime of happiness," Isaac said softly, suddenly serious again. "I'd give every hat, horse, and acre I own just to see you smile at me the way you're smiling right now." "Pa, Ma, come quick," Oliver's voice interrupted the moment as he came barreling out of the house. "Beth stuck in the cookie jar." Isaac and Zenobia exchanged a look of amused resignation before hurrying to rescue their daughter from her latest misadventure. As they entered the kitchen to find Beth with her small hand indeed trapped in the ceramic jar, chocolate smeared across her guilty face, Zenobia couldn't help but reflect on how perfectly imperfect their life together was. From the desperate uncertainty of that auction block to this moment of domestic chaos, it had been a journey neither of them could have imagined. Yet somehow, through fate or providence or simple human kindness, they had found each other and built something beautiful from the ruins of their past lives. That night, with the children finally asleep and the ranch quiet under a canopy of stars, Isaac and Zenobia sat on the porch swing, his arm around her shoulders as they gently rocked back and forth. No words were needed between them, just the peaceful communion of two souls who had weathered storms together and emerged stronger for it. As Zenobia rested her head against her husband's strong shoulder, She thought about the frightened young woman she had once been pregnant, abandoned, and facing a future of servitude or worse. How could she have known that the tall stranger raising his hat at that auction would become not her master but her partner, not her owner but her beloved? Life had taken them on an unexpected journey. But looking back, Zenobia wouldn't have changed a single step. For it was the difficult path that had led them here to this ranch, this family, this love that continued to deepen with each passing year. And as Isaac pressed a tender kiss to her hair, whispering, "I love you," in the darkness, Zenobia knew with absolute certainty that their story, which had begun with desperation and uncertainty, would continue to unfold with joy and purpose for all the years to come. For in a world often harsh and unforgiving, they had created a haven of love and acceptance. And in doing so, they had transformed what might have been a tale of exploitation and despair into one of redemption, and hope, proving that sometimes the most beautiful beginnings arise from the most unlikely circumstances.